So, tonight, we're going to have the Big Bang meets the Big Bang Nobel Prize meets the Big Bang Ig Nobel Prize. It's 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, kind of. Let's begin with Eric. Eric, at lunch today, you revealed your middle name might be for Linus Pauling. Is that true, or is that
No, that's untrue. My brother Flippy, who's in the audience, was given a consolation prize for having a baby brother imposed on him, and was able to come up with the middle name of the baby. And it could easily have been, what's that sound?
What is that sound? Is it a hiss?
Is it me? Okay, so it could easily have been Batman, but in fact it was Linus, after Linus in Peanuts. But my mother was a biology teacher, and she lied and told me that I was named after Linus Pauling, the inventor of the citric acid cycle.
Well, it's a good story.
It's a great story.
Yeah.
But that Linus was named, Linus in the comic strip was named after Linus Pauling, wasn't he?
No.
You sure?
No.
Can we have someone fact check?
I don't think he was. I think he was created in the 50s before Linus Pauling was famous.
Oh, Linus Pauling was very famous.
You think he was named after Linus Pauling? Yes. Is that true? Do we have a confirmation from the floor?
It's very clear that this panel is going to need a fact checker, but
yeah, it's very clear this panel is running into the weeds 10 seconds into it.
Fact checkers.
Yeah, let me ask Eric this. You know, people in the scientific community really love the Big Bang Theory, and it's been on for 10 years, which is totally amazing.
That's great.
And it's number one. But one of the things people say to me is, why do they stereotype us so much? Why are they, four nerdy guys who it took years for them to get the girls? And why are they so neurotic? Are you stereotyping your characters?
Well, I think it's an attempt to be a self-portrait, actually. And the notion that a bunch of outsiders can be interested in each other and can be interested in the topics that they're passionate about, I would not call them nerds. I always considered nerd to be a sort of form of hate speech that preceded like some kind of physical or verbal attack. But I do think that I can recognize the notion of people who are more interested in discussing thoughts and hypotheses than with their friends and fashion and socializing.
Yeah, it's as good as anything.
It's as good as anything.
Yeah, well, let's see what you do. We're going to have a short clip from...
You get to watch TV.
From the Big Bang.
I brought Amy here to show her some of the work I'm doing.
It's very impressive for theoretical work.
Do I detect a hint of condescension?
I'm sorry, was I being too subtle? I meant compared to the real-world applications of neurobiology, theoretical physics is, what's the word I'm looking for? Cute.
Are you suggesting the work of a neurobiologist like Babinski could ever rise to the significance of a physicist like Clark Maxwell or Dirac?
I'm stating it outright. Babinski eats Dirac for breakfast and defecates Clark Maxwell.
You take that back.
Absolutely not. My colleagues and I are mapping the neurological substrates that subserve global information processing, which is required for all cognitive reasoning, including scientific inquiry, making my research ipso facto prior in the ordo cognoscendi. That means it's better than his research, and by extension, of course, yours.
I'm sorry, I'm still trying to work on defecating Clark Maxwell. So.
Yeah, excuse me, but a grand unified theory, insofar as it explains everything, will ipso facto explain neurobiology.
Yes, but if I'm successful, I will be able to map and reproduce your thought processes in deriving a grand unified theory, and therefore subsume your conclusions under my paradigm.
That's the rankest psychologism, and was conclusively revealed as hogwash by Gottlieb Frege in the 1890s.
We appear to have reached an impasse.
I agree. I move our relationship terminate immediately.
Seconded.
There being no objections? The motion carries. Good day, Amy Farrah Fowler.
Good day, Sheldon Cooper.
Women, huh? Can't live with them, can't successfully refute their hypotheses.
Amen to that.
Does anyone on the panel know people like that?
Don't you mean to ask us, do we know anyone other than people like that? Yeah, there are a lot of people like that.
Where'd you get this idea, Eric?
Well, you know, it's funny, I was remembering it. I think that argument that Amy makes, I was trying to make it a dissertation when I was studying philosophy of mind at Columbia, and I never got it off the ground, so I had it kind of kicking around. And then I decided to use it in this fight between Amy and Sheldon. I still think it's an interesting argument, actually. You know, like
But not the way to, you know,
beg your pardon?
it's not the way to score.
Well, they're not trying to score, they're having a fight. They're having a fight, and they're expressing who's going to be like the top dog in their relationship by who's the top dog intellectually.
They're never going to get together.
They do get together.
They do, but
get together.
based on that, it's going to take.
Well, you know, steel sharpening steel, I suppose.
So that's the meat of a funny series about scientists. And for years, many people in the science community were trying to get some kind of a television series going about the scientific world, and it never worked, but you made it work, Eric. Marc, let me know, how did you get the idea for the Ig Nobel Prize, and how do you go about selecting winners?
Okay, the very capsule version. Since I was a little kid, I liked anything about science and also funny stuff, and I liked to write and combine those, which made me a rather odd little kid. After college, I was doing computer stuff, but I kept writing this stuff, and eventually I became curious about whether I could get something published. If you write funny stuff about science, you got a problem because there are no obvious places even to try to get it published. And I wrote off to the one author I could think of who might have some advice, a guy named Martin Gardner, who used to write a column in Scientific American. He also invented things like the annotated Alice in Wonderland book, and all those annotated books. Martin was the first one. He sent me back a very nice and encouraging letter, encouraging about me, but discouraging about doing that, saying he had had that same problem in his whole career, no place to send funny things. But he said there used to be an old magazine, see if you can find that. I couldn't find the magazine, but I found an old address. I sent some stuff off to the old address, and a few weeks later I got a phone call from a guy who said, "Hi, I'm the publisher of the journal. I got your articles. Would you be the editor of the journal?"
So never in the history of publishing has someone done a submission and got the magazine in exchange.
I thought that's how all editors get
Yeah,
their...
it's never happened to me. I've been freelancing for 50
So I started doing
years.
that, and for about 4 or 5 years I ran my little software company and then did this at night. The first year I started the Ig Nobel Prize ceremony, which I'll explain in a second, and that started growing really rapidly. This is the 27th year for the ceremony. The Ig Nobel Prizes are given out, 10 of them every year, for things that make people laugh, then think. That's the only criterion. They make people laugh, then think. Most of them are about science, but not all. We get something like 9,000 or 10,000 new nominations every year. About 10 to 20% of those are people who nominate themselves. A lot of people want these, but it's rare for those self-nominees to win. And when we choose winners, we get in touch with them quietly and offer it to them. And if they say no, that's the end of it. We don't tell anybody. But happily for us, almost everybody says yes. There's a big ceremony every fall at Harvard University. The winners come from around the world at their own expense because we have no money. And we introduce them. They're secret until that moment. And then the great moment is every time I announce a new winner, the winner steps out, and a Nobel Prize winner, a real one, steps out. And Bob has been part of this several times and shakes their hands. And they're both looking at each other, usually grinning. And you can see they're thinking, I really don't believe this is happening.
Well, let's look at some examples.
Okay.
You've got it.
I brought
Ig
3 quick
Nobels.
things, just pictures to show you, and I show pictures.
I brought Amy here to show her some of the work I'm
That's
doing.
not mine.
That's not
Very
Ig Nobel,
impressive.
that's
Not
top
mine.
rated.
Let's see if we can get this off. I tend to show pictures of these things because I found early on when I was doing public talks that I would do the talk and people would come up afterwards and say, "Oh, those jokes are so funny. How'd you think of that?" And I would explain, "No, it's not." All right, these are 3 things very quickly that have won Ig Nobel Prizes. This is these are all scientific papers, or this is one's a patent. This is a paper published in a science journal. The title you can see is An Analysis of the Forces Required to Drag Sheep Over Various Surfaces. This was written by 7 scientists in Australia. This one sticks with me in a lot of ways. For one thing, when I called up to offer them the prize quietly, that phone call was the first moment any of them ever realized that what they did was funny. But they immediately realized how it looks. They live in a part of Australia where sheep is the big industry. You want to know why they did this? In that industry, there are giant buildings where thousands of sheep are herded through there and sheared to get the wool off with big mechanical things, and it's really dangerous. There are a lot of injuries to the sheep, to the people, and the speed you can move these things through turns out to translate very quickly into a lot of money. The industry got these scientists, said, "Look at everything that happens here, tell us how we can improve this."
Time motion studies for
It was
sheep.
exactly, it was a time motion study. Nobody's pointed that out. And one of the things that they discovered, and this may sound like a tiny thing, but it added up to a lot of money. This is how they phrase it in talks, because I've done some things with them, is one of the things they discovered is it's easier to drag a sheep downhill. Another reason that this one sticks in my mind is they were thrilled at the chance to come to the United States and get some attention, because it gets a lot of attention around the world. And they said, "Can we tell the president of the university, because we need to do that?" And, "Okay, just make sure you keep secret." The president of their university forbade them to accept this prize. And they rebelled. And when the prize was announced, they got tremendous amounts of publicity, especially in Australia, all of it favorable. So this turned out to be a very happy thing. All right, so that's one thing. This next one is a patent you can see on the left. It's for an emergency brassiere. It's for a brassiere that in an emergency can be quickly separated into a pair of protective face masks. One to save your life, one to save the life of some lucky bystander, and I have one of them here. Okay.
It's a nice color.
The photo was taken at the ceremony. That's Dr. Elena Bodnar, whose back is to you. She's asphyxiate. We wanted to have a demonstration, and we had 3 Nobel laureates there. Paul Krugman, you can see on the right.
Really?
Orhan Pamuk, who has a Nobel Prize in literature, and Wolfgang Ketterle, who has a physics prize on the left. She did this because, as a young doctor, she grew up in Ukraine. Remember the Chernobyl power plant melted down? It was a terrible thing. She was one of the doctors who treated victims there. She and other doctors stayed in touch with each other over the years and with some of the victims, and they discovered that a lot of the worst medical damage was stuff they hadn't expected. It was people breathed in radioactive particles, and once that stuff got in their lungs, it stayed, and it did huge damage. So she and her husband later moved to the US, but she kept thinking there's got to be some simple thing that could be around in case some horrible, unexpected emergency happens. Then she had a baby, and one day she was looking, and her infant son was on the floor playing with his mother's bra. And that's where the idea came from.
Did you wash this item before you brought it to me?
Let me move on to the next one.
Here are your...
And the third one I'll show you, this was published in a biology journal in the Netherlands. It only has a few hundred readers, but one of them sent it to us. The title of this paper is, this is the first scientifically reported case of homosexual necrophilia in the mallard duck.
But by no means the last.
It turns out, no, it is no, because
Thank goodness.
the author of this, who studies birds, you can see videos, he's wonderful at explaining this. Once this happened, he got lots of publicity, and he almost instantly turned into the place that biologists around the world call up when they see something really strange. And his museum now has a collection of birds that died in spectacular ways, which you can go to see. The duck is just one of them.
But was it dressed provocatively, the dead duck? Or?
When you ask that kind of question, it requires me to ask a question back. When you say provocatively, do you mean provocatively to you and me or to a duck?
Provocatively to a duck.
I really can't speak on behalf of. I would like to, but I don't have the knowledge.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, before this conversation gets any worse, Bob Wilson is the only person I know of who, at least tonight, who's been at both the Nobel ceremonies in Stockholm and received the award from the king, and who has been to the Ig Nobel Prize events and received whatever you give
And
people.
given, no.
So, Bob, would you tell a little bit about the story of how you got the Nobel?
Okay.
Because there's a funny aspect to it.
In 1963, after doing a physics PhD and a one-year postdoc at Caltech, I took a job at Bell Labs in Holmdel. Arno Penzias had come a little more than a year later, a little more than a year earlier, and so there were two radio astronomers there. Bell Labs had built the 20-foot horn reflector. I don't know whether you can get a picture of it, but no hurry. And had very sensitive receivers. They had done this for Project Echo, the first communication satellite. First communication satellite launched after the Russians launched.
Pardon me, things are floating around on here.
Keep talking.
Yeah, okay.
We have a
Just
technical.
keep vamping while he.
Yeah.
So at Bell Labs, they thought that this nice instrument would be very useful for radio astronomy.
So here we have a picture now.
There we have a picture, yes. And they thought that a couple of radio astronomers would be useful for satellite communications too, because we would know about looking through the atmosphere and large antennas. Arno and I thought that this was a great opportunity to use an antenna which had some unique properties. One of the unique properties was the excellent shielding of the antenna, which you can't really tell from that picture.
Do you want one of the different pictures?
Well, we'll take your word for it. It had excellent properties.
Yes, such that we could look at a place in the sky and measure its brightness without comparing it to any other part of the sky. I had done a measurement of the Milky Way, and we wanted to look for a halo around it. Since we're inside it, there is no place you can look that doesn't see through some of the Milky Way. A second unique property was that it was small enough but sensitive enough that we could make some accurate measurements of radio sources that would be useful for radio astronomers and for satellite
there it is.
communication.
That one? Yes, there we
You
go.
can see
So-
the receiver would be in the cabin back there, and that big horn that leads into it shields it very well from the ground. So our plan was to build a precision measuring system using the Telstar traveling wave maser we had to measure the radio sources and check on our ability to see that we could really measure nearly zero with the antenna, and then go to a lower frequency where we expected to find a halo. When we first put our system together to make a measurement, it was a great disappointment. Too much radio noise was coming out of the horn reflector. However, we were in the midst of, we had calibrated the horn reflector, we were in the midst of making the other measurements, so for about 9 months, we improved the precision of our receiver and made our measurements. In the end, we decided we have to get to the bottom of this.
So, may I interrupt and kind of translate a little? You were getting all this weird noise from all over that you didn't understand what it was.
Well, every place we looked, we had the same excess power coming into the antenna.
And it didn't make sense.
No.
No.
We didn't.
So,
well,
did you think, what did you think was going on?
well, we had a list of things we thought might be the problem.
And were they avian in nature?
Well, one of them was avian in nature.
Yeah, tell us about the avians, since that's the theme tonight.
Before you go on to the avian, did you consider lying and just saying that there was no, if you didn't understand it?
No.
Good.
It was going to keep us from doing the experiment we wanted to do.
I see.
Eric, real scientists don't do that.
That's good.
And there's no point in it. We could have simply not said anything about it.
Right.
There's no point in lying.
So anyway, you're admirable for doing that, and you should all be like him.
So back to the birds.
Right. Well, among the things on our list, there was a pair of pigeons who lived in the horn reflector. I guess we've gone to the pigeon trap, but the antenna was stored looking down. The pigeons went up inside it. They got near the cabin where it was warm in the winter, cool in the summer. Wonderful place, except about once a week, these two crazy guys came and rotated it all around. Their world went crazy. But after we went away, they went right back.
That's why they're called homing pigeons, right? They
Well,
go to home
yes. So, of course, you all know what happens when there are pigeons around. They're pigeon dropping everywhere. And we thought that pigeon droppings inside our pristine antenna were not an ideal situation that we could calculate. So we had to do something about it. We got the have-a-heart trap, which you saw, put it up where the receiver used to be, caught the pigeons, put them in a box, mailed them as far away as we could in the company mail to Whippany, New Jersey, and started cleaning out the horn reflector. Well, we mailed them to a pigeon fancier, which I guess it was a mistake. He looked at the pigeons, said, "These are junk pigeons, let them go." Whippany is about 30 or a little more miles from Homedale as the pigeon flies. And so it wasn't long before the pigeons were back. So our technician brought in his shotgun, and in the name of science, the pigeons were dispatched.
So that's very unhappy, but
that was not the Big Bang.
yeah.
No.
When did you realize it was not pigeons or pigeon dung and was like an echo of the Big Bang?
Well,
Beginning
all
of
of the
the
things we had thought of failed.
Yeah, so
We
that
be-
was it.
We,
You know?
we believed in physics. What was coming out has to come from somewhere. So we were really scratching our head when we were put in contact with Bob Dickey's group in Princeton. He had thought about a hot Big Bang and realized that it would be full of intense radiation, the universe would in its early stages. And as it expanded, that radiation would cool. And by now, it would certainly be microwaves, not infrared or light.
There's a
Can I ask you a
question.
How come he realized that and no one had realized it before? Because when you say it, it seems pretty obvious.
Yes, actually, some people had realized
So
it
who was the
before.
first who realized it?
George Gamow and his friends Alpha and Herman.
And how did he realize it?
They were trying to make elements understand how to make elements in the early universe.
Right.
And at least one of them realized there would be thermal radiation. And they made a calculation, and remarkably, they came up with about 5 degrees, based on astrophysical numbers that were probably all incorrect.
And, but it's just amazing to me that, like, and before he realized that, no one had realized it. Just
Not that I know of.
And you know how he did have an extra cup of coffee? Like, what was it that caused him to suddenly realize it?
They never explained.
Okay, well, that's also admirable. Okay, anyway, go on. I'm sorry.
So you ended up proving something that Einstein had theorized about. How did that feel? Like, wow.
Yes, this radiation can only have come from the Big Bang. And Well, Einstein really wasn't, he made the theory of general relativity from which you can calculate the universe. However, he thought the universe was static and invented a term in general relativity so that could be the case. Meanwhile, astronomers were showing that it was expanding. And other people figured out how to use Einstein's equations and understand an expanding universe.
So when I was a kid, if someone was really smart, they called them an Einstein. But in retrospect, they shouldn't have.
Well, he was very
he's
smart about
smart.
a lot of things.
Okay.
Yeah, no, he knew his stuff. I'm wondering, though, Eric, could you write a scene like this? Would you write it into the series?
Oh, I'd love to.
How would you
Well,
do that?
it seems to me almost like a love affair between Dr. Wilson and the universe, where Dr. Wilson loves the universe and he wants to understand it, but it's a bit coquettish. It doesn't yield its secrets to him. But he's persistent, and he suffers emotional pangs, but he keeps at it. And his willingness to brave this kind of disappointment is what ultimately causes the universe to reveal its secrets to him about this background radiation. And it's interesting, like you might have another story with an ancient Viking, and his theory about the universe is that it was somehow came out of the udders of a huge cow. But that's wrong. So both, it's a kind of a love triangle between this ancient Norwegian Viking and Dr. Wilson as to who's going to learn the nature of the universe, and at the end he wins, and he and the universe live happily ever after.
Eric, if you had to toss in some complications, could you do that?
Some complications?
Yeah.
Well,
That's a very simple theory.
well, right. There seems to be this issue that for a while people thought that the most scientific thing to say about the universe is that it was always here. And it seemed to be some kind of religious mumbo jumbo to think that it came about at one point. So that's kind of neat. So maybe there's some kind of bad guy who's like, I was always here. Cut it out, Robert. Get your head out of the clouds. It was always here. Look, if you're being crazy, something like that.
Actually, at Caltech, my one cosmology course was taught by Sir Fred Hoyle,
Really?
one of the originators of the steady state theory.
Right.
And
So
philosophically, I rather liked it.
why did you like it philosophically?
It seemed very nice to have a universe that always was and always will be. I don't much like physics that only solves one problem, so the spontaneous creation of matter.
So were you at war with yourself at some point? You were like,
No.
the data is pointing in this direction, but I hate it philosophically. What am I going to do?
I didn't hate it that much.
You didn't hate it that much. But in the movie, you'll express your emotions more vigorously.
Always. Mark, I realize that this discovery was made before you enshrined the Ig Nobels, but let's do some time travel and kind of put you all in the same decade. Would you, before Bob got the real Nobel, would you have given him an Ig Nobel
For this?
Yeah.
I mean, for the pigeon part.
Yeah, for the pigeon part.
But the other part isn't all that obviously hilarious.
Well, you know what would have been hilarious, perhaps, is the reaction of the Princeton mathematicians who had been working on the problem all along for years and
That's a
years
long
and
story.
didn't find it, but this Bell Labs
Perhaps.
guy did.
Perhaps. With the Ig Nobel
Well, he wasn't
Prizes,
a cowboy,
yeah.
right? I mean, you were a physicist.
Yes.
You weren't the
Right.
janitor.
Yeah.
No, but two high mathematicians
Okay.
at Princeton.
Well, these were physicists, but very good physicists.
Yes. You were very generous to them once you got the Nobel Prize. You credited them very
Yes. Well, they were certainly part of the discovery. I had read George Gamoff's children's books as a kid, but I don't think they ever wrote it into there. And if so, I didn't remember it for sure.
Bob, have you gotten more than 100 million crank letters since this happened?
No, not that
Really?
many, but there have been a lot.
Now, how gracious was Sir Fred when he realized that his entire life's work was wrong?
I think he went to his grave believing that he could save the steady state theory.
Poor guy.
Yes.
What a waste of time.
He's one of the few people who hung on.
Really?
He
So do you feel
achieved
sorry
steady
for him?
state.
Oh,
Yes.
he himself was a steady state. Didn't he?
Yes.
So, Bob, do you watch The Big Bang Theory on TV? Do you like it?
I have not watched it very much.
Oh.
I looked
Okay,
at a
but
number.
the lesson is that Dr. Wilson doesn't waste time watching TV. He's doing science.
That is actually the case. That
I believe
Yes.
it. I'm not
Spend
making a
much
joke. I think it's
time.
true.
But Dr. Wilson is still working on these big questions. You're working on what now?
Well, I work with an array of antennas in Hawaii. The question we're working on now is to image the supermassive black hole at the center of our universe, at the center of our galaxy. It's about 4 million solar masses. And of course, being a black hole, it's tiny, and we're a long way away from the center of the
Like
galaxy.
orange, the size of an orange?
No, it's bigger than that.
How big is it? The size of New York?
Probably, I can't tell you, I'm sorry.
Because you don't want to say.
What? No,
You don't know.
I don't know.
Okay.
I
So
don't want to give you a false number.
What is the one question you'd most like to know the answer to about this black hole?
Well, what we're going to do is the thing we would like to do is watch material. We'd like to see that the theory is actually right and we see the shadow of the black hole. Mm-hmm. We're almost there. Then we also we know that there's material falling into it, because when material falls in, it makes a burst of radiation. And we like to see this process up close.
Now, what about that deal about like one virtual particle falls in and one virtual particle goes out?
The Roche motel
Is that
theory.
for real, or is that just
That
Hollywood?
is Stephen Hawking's
Yeah.
way of having it evaporate.
Is that for real or no?
Yes, I
It
think
is.
so.
Okay, cool.
I mean, I don't think anyone has ever proved it, but I don't think there's any problem with Stephen's calculations.
So you think it's true? Mm-hmm. Okay, well, okay, that's good.
Eric, I'm wondering, when you first began doing this, did you think The Big Bang Theory, the TV series, would last 10 years?
Well, no, I didn't. I mean, I don't think I had an opinion either way, right? I mean, like, I was happy that people liked to watch it, but I didn't have any data to form a projection as to whether or not it would last 10 years. So I think I was agnostic on the question.
Eric,
And that's not a great answer. I mean, what all of us are doing, just to let you behind the scenes, is we're trying to be informative, but we're also trying to entertain. And sometimes it goes more in one direction, sometimes it goes more in the other.
well, maybe we should throw this out to the audience and take a break from this exertion.
Before you do that, I'd like to say one thing that I think The Big Bang Theory, the TV show, has done a wonderful thing for science and for the country especially. I was going to say the world, but that's true too, but especially the country. America has always been very, at least after the days of Ben Franklin, who was the first great scientist and who was a truly great scientist and was very funny. But ever since then, America's been different from most other countries that have scientists. In America, science and funny do not go together. And the Big Bang changed that. It made it possible for people to think those two things go together. You can compare this with England, where the opposite has been true. In England, funny and science always have been together. Even the way things are written up in the British science journals are very different from the American journals. America has always looked on science as being something that's very earnest. You know, it's important, and therefore it's not funny, because it's important. When I started doing this stuff, I would occasionally run into older scientists and older newspaper people who thought what I was doing was evil because that's science and it's not funny. And I got some real lectures. And and people were really exercised about this. And that's changed a little bit because we got better known, and a little bit because things changed in general, but it changed a lot because of the Big Bang Theory, where scientists now are not these monsters anymore. They may be odd in people's views, but it's hard to even say anymore, because now this is part of the culture, but it changed things for the better. So thanks, all you guys.
Yeah, well, that's kind of you to say. Yeah, one of the things we're conscious of is that there seems to be the notion of the scientist as the evil brainiac, like Dr. Frankenstein, or the scientist as the noble saint. And neither of them gives a normal person kind of emotional entree into the world of science, which is, it's done by humans. So if you can convey science as a human activity, then I think it makes people feel a little more like it's something that they could participate in, and they don't need to feel like those scientists are doing something to us with their science, but more like science is part of our collective effort to understand life.
Do you follow scientific news for story ideas?
Yeah.
Like what?
Oh, like what? Well, there was an interesting thing that we came across about a machine that could detect emotion that was being developed at MIT. I don't know if we aired that one yet.
Yeah, last week.
I think we did. Okay, so the MIT was developing a machine, and you could point it at someone, and if you were not good at detecting emotions, it could tell you. Oh, and here's another good one, which was
If they saw you pointing it, would that not induce emotions in them?
you could do it surreptitiously, I
Under your
suppose.
coat.
But
In your iPhone.
in your iPhone. And then there was another interesting one about you could take, what was this? You could take skin cells and you could turn them into brain cells, and you could have a tiny brain, like quite tiny. And then you could take that tiny brain and you could teach it to recognize faces as sort of like a connectionist learning network, but it was one that was made of nerve cells that you had made out of your own skin cells. So that seemed pretty neat, and that became a story about, that was Maria Ferrari, who's a great writer on our show, that became a story about Sheldon and Amy having a baby, but the baby was a brain baby made of his skin, and they were proud of it, and they felt it was smarter than all the other brain babies. Presumably they flushed it at the end of the episode. I don't know if we got into that, because it seemed like it might bum people out.
They've got a weird relationship. But why don't we open this up to
great,
the audience?
great
Can we
idea.
get the lights on the audience? And let me give some ground rules on this. Please ask a question, not make a speech. I will be a very ruthless moderator that way. And also, I need to repeat your questions because we are being broadcast live on the Y's own internet connection, but also Scientific American, thank you, and Nature is also live streaming this. So we need to repeat your questions for them. Please say your name, and I think the lights are coming on. There are two people around with microphones. Any questions for our guests? Yes? You are?
I'm Liliana Klinger. I have a background in science, and I was surprised you said that there's no humor in science before the Big Bang, because there was Richard Feynman, whom you've heard of, and very real, very funny.
To whom the word rebel is always attached.
Yeah, so to repeat the question, or if it was a question, Liliana said that she was surprised that people on this panel thought there isn't a lot of humor in science. After all, there was Richard Feynman. What's the answer to that?
Well, you're the one who said there was no humor
Yeah.
in science, so
What-
you have to respond to this crushing objection.
I'm not sure I phrased it quite that way, because that certainly wasn't what I meant. Science has always been full of humor, a lot. But in public, no. In public, and especially in formal settings or in the description of science you would see in the newspapers or any place else, that stuff would be removed. It just would.
So when
wasn't
he
considered
has
kosher.
that book called Surely You're Joking, Mr. Feynman,
Yeah.
sort of implicit in that speech act is that's unusual of him to be joking. So he existed, but he was not typical.
Yeah. That's part of what makes that book so much fun, is you can see how he was like a creature from another time and place in the eyes of a lot of the people who met him.
But he was really a creature from Rockaway.
From Pasadena, and
No,
from Rockaway, and then
Yeah.
from Pasadena, yeah.
But by the way, one of another danger, also to let you behind the scenes, is when we talk about science, if you ask us questions about science, we might be able to be funny. But if you ask us questions about comedy, the answer will not be funny. So just forewarned is forearmed.
Yeah.
Well, there's another part to that answer too, which is a lot of stuff is funny if it's far enough outside your experience. That's true of a lot of science. If people look at a science journal, they often will look at it, and if they don't throw it down, they'll start laughing because some of this stuff seems so completely absurd they can't make sense of it. And if that's the end of it, that's maybe not so useful. But if there's somebody there who can explain it at that moment, because they're paying attention at that, for those 5 seconds they're laughing, they're paying attention, that's interesting. And the scientists in that field who read that, if they see it as funny, they're going to pay attention themselves. And that being funny sometimes serves a real useful purpose. You know, this whole pigeon story, I would bet, helped some of the other scientists at that point pay attention to what happened in New Jersey. It sounded crazy, and once they got a couple details, they forgot that it was funny. Now,
There's another odd thing, and again, this is an example of philosophy of humor and not humor. But if you can state the point of a joke perfectly, it's not funny. And if you cannot state the point of a joke at all, if you're absolutely puzzled by it, it's not funny. So comedy seems to, I believe, exist in this sort of when your concepts or your views or your beliefs are sort of malleable, almost like molten lava, that you haven't yet formed your opinion, and there's a sense of chaos or flux. And that's why I think comedy is a sort of odd thing to pin down, because if you successfully pin it down, you've caused that lava to harden up like rock, and you've said something that makes sense and is clear, but it doesn't seem funny anymore. And that's my manifesto about comedy. But
is there a difference
as I
between,
promised you, it's not funny.
Is there a difference between, to continue in this philosophical path, is there a difference between comedy and love?
Between comedy and love?
Yes, which also is
well, I certainly. Because they're both about transitional states
and indefinable.
Yeah, I think both are about sort of self-transformational practices. So they do have something in common.
Is one better than the other?
No.
Well, I think there's some more questions from the audience. Are there? It's hard to see. The woman in the back. Yes. Hey, my students out there, don't you have questions?
Hello. I think many of us, if not most of us, would agree that there's sort of an anti-intellectual push going on in this country. And I was wondering if the panel feels that humor can help be a defense against that, and if you think there's a risk in that humor becoming too sarcastic or condescending to work.
So to repeat the question is, in an atmosphere that seems to be very anti-intellectual, are you risking science's credibility by leaning towards
I didn't think that was the question. I thought the question was, are you going to come across as a condescending jerk if you make jokes? Which is the question? Yes, well, we can answer either question, but we need to know which one it is.
How effective do you think humor can be a defense against this, what I feel is some anti-intellectual push in this nation, this direction that some people want to take it in, and how you can avoid it becoming too sarcastic, like you said, so that people don't react positively to it?
So to rephrase it, how can you use science and humor as a tool for better understanding?
Well, I think, so when you talk about anti-intellectualism, you're dealing with the fact that people feel dissed by the fact that other people know something that they don't. And that is a perfectly fair thing to feel. Like if you feel that someone is using their knowledge to push you around, that is, I think, human and understandable. And I think if someone were to make a joke about that, I think I would try and formulate a joke where the basic idea is, yeah, everybody feels that way, and it's okay, but watch it, because if you're too concerned about being dissed by the person who built your airplane, that you would rather fly in an airplane designed by a witch doctor, that you will crash, and that's not good for you. So my approach to comedy would be to accept that we all don't like being dissed. We all would like to be the smartest person in the room, or maybe the universe, but occasionally we need to give up on that desire in the interest of something better, like flying somewhere. But you guys might have a different impression.
Could you use humor to get people's attention and at the same time show them the actual process of how we learn things so that they'll tend to believe it more?
That sounds good.
All right, and I'm trying to do something a little different. What I'm usually trying to do, and all of us, the magazine and the Ig Nobel, is trying to present something that is funny if it's presented clearly enough and pithily enough, and that as you're laughing at it, you're thinking about the question of it, not the answer of it. Once you're starting to think about the question, you're kind of hooked. I'll give you an example of another thing that won a prize that I think is like that. There was a prize we gave to a paper published in a British science journal, and the title of this paper was Courtship Behavior of Ostriches Towards Humans Under Farming Conditions in Britain. Courtship behavior of ostriches towards humans under farming conditions in Britain, which sounds insane, perhaps, to you. And why would anyone do this? Well, there was an ostrich meat industry that was started in Britain about 30 years ago. The investors thought this was going to be bigger than the beef industry. That's how they promoted it. It was a lot of money and government backing in. They started farms, ostrich farms. Everything was going great, except the ostriches did not reproduce. And if they don't reproduce, you got no industry. The farmers were going crazy, so they hired some good biologists to come in, spent a year watching what was happening, and they discovered that these ostriches hatch from an egg. They look around, and they see two kinds of creatures there that have legs. One of them has legs and two wing-like things, and one of them has sort of four legs. And the ostriches, most of them found one of those kinds of creatures far more sexually attractive than the other. Guess which one? So in that sense, it's easy if you want to make fun of that scientific thing and all scientists by pointing to that report, you can do it. But if somebody is standing there or you even look at the details, you discover some door just opened to some very strange, wonderful story, and it's a question you can pursue for a long time.
So maybe it's just Britain and that climate.
See, you can't resist thinking.
I know. I was just thinking. Love.
Ever been near an ostrich?
I have, actually.
Do you remember how it reacted to you?
It was not enormously attracted, I have to say, but they're very pretty.
Maybe it was intimidated.
Could be.
That's quite likely.
That long happened to me before I met my husband.
I don't want a bird to fall in love with me, but if a bird was going to fall in love with me, it'd be pretty cool if it were an ostrich.
No, it wouldn't. Charles Paxton, who's one of the authors.
Biggest of the birds.
No.
It's not the biggest of the birds.
No, I'm not disagreeing with that. Charles Paxton is one of the authors of this. He's British, a very proper, very nice guy. And he said that he was the one the ostriches always fell in love with.
Right.
Ostriches are big, and they are powerful.
And they're orange.
Yeah.
No, they're black and white.
No, the males are orange.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, we learn something new every day.
Well,
but I think
if an ostrich falls in love with you, it's got a lot more power than
I believe it's dangerous, but still cool.
Each to his own in these things.
No matter
yes.
what we do, we talk about birds here.
Yeah, there's a lot of bird love tonight.
I see there are some other
There's
questions.
some on the other side.
The woman on the aisle, you are? Hello? Oh, sorry. Yes.
Hi, it's one of your students.
Which one?
Savannah.
Hi, Savannah.
Hi, and so I had a question to transition from ostriches, but I was wondering, for science writers, if you had any strategies on how to address scientifically sound theories, but some that are publicly controversial.
Would you mind if
Say
we ignored the question and
climate
talked about ostriches? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm obligated to repeat the question. Savannah Miller wants to know how you can, please repeat the question, I'm sorry.
If you have any strategies for science writers to address topics that are scientifically sound but publicly controversial, like climate change right now.
Savannah Miller wants to know if you have some strategies to address controversial issues in science that will educate the public.
Right, so climate change isn't a scientifically controversial topic,
But it
right?
is a public-
There are people who don't believe it, but they're wrong. So I think you, right?
Politically controversial.
Is it a scientific controversy anymore?
No.
It's not. Okay.
But it still is a problem.
So a lot of
So
people
how do
don't
you
know
convert these people who believe the oil companies that it really is a thing for us to worry about?
Right. That is a
This
problem.
is more of a psychology problem, I think, than a science problem.
Right.
It's a journalist problem.
Well,
And how many of those people really don't believe in climate change, and how many of them, like the tobacco industry, when they were claiming not to believe that cigarettes caused cancer, are just lying in the hopes of making money? Do we know?
Well, one thing you can do is write very, very near the start of it, make clear what kind of controversy this is. Is this the kind of controversy because this is new and nobody has been batting this back and forth enough to really have much evidence to say this is what it means? Or is this controversial because there is some group that's paying money and paying politicians to tell people? If it's that kind, then I think, as a reader of lots of stuff as well as somebody who writes about it, I am grateful when I pick up a newspaper or magazine or something and right at the start they give me that context. Without it, it's really tough to figure out what's going on, and I think that's important context.
Yeah, there almost needs to be investigative journalism if there are malicious actors, you know? If there are people who are, for their own purposes, lying and creating the appearance of lack of knowledge where there isn't any, then that becomes like a Woodward and Bernstein kind of thing to, like, you know, prove that.
One difficulty in a lot of places has been that a lot of editors are really overcautious about taking that approach, and they'll kind of mince around, and so the poor reader has a tough time figuring out what's going on.
Well, I'm proud to say at the New York Times, people have been very, very thorough and consistent and have kind of dealt with one of the problems has been that the science is extremely complicated to explain, and that may be one of the reasons why the public has difficulty in seeing what's going on. It's long-term, it's extremely mathematical, the results are not immediately perceptible all the time, and still, even though that would be hard to write up, we've covered it.
That's great. An analogy is, whenever I'm given a choice of cell phone plans, I always feel that I'm going to lose and pick the one that's not good for me, because I know that on the other side is a genius at cell phone plan trickery who got a MBA, if not a PhD, in how to trick people in their cell phone plans. And I have like 2 minutes to pick the cell phone plan, and usually I realize they trick me, they lead me by the nose very easily, that there's a one that's clearly cheap and lousy, and then one that's really expensive and great, and then one in the middle, which of course they wanted me to pick all along. So I fall into that trap easily because they're spending a lot of time trying to trick me, and I'm spending a very little amount of time trying to figure out what cell phone plan to get. So that's why journalists need to help the poor science consumer, because a bunch of clever, you know, wicked people are trying to come up with a great trick to make it confusing, and the person who's reading it in 2 minutes is sort of like, well, I don't know, it sounds like it's confusing. You know, they don't have as much time to see through the lies as the liars have to concoct the lies.
The good part of this is it's not just a science problem anymore. In the last month or so, it's become a problem about everything. So.
Right.
We have some more questions in the audience. There was a question over there. You are? Yeah. And there's a question there.
This is a turf battle.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. I'm David Levine, excuse my voice. In Europe, there are people who are very fiscally conservative and socially conservative, but they don't have the religious right affiliation, where they deny science based on, God created the earth in 7 days, or climate change is a hoax. They believe this. They believe it. But there's no tie-in with religion. In America, there's a very, very strong tie-in with religion and scientific belief. I was just wondering what you thought of that.
So the question, which is some of the problem religion? More or less is the question.
Let's dump some of this on Bob's lap.
Yeah, Bob, do you think some of the problem is in religion?
I tend to think so.
Yeah.
I think people who grow up in a household listening to preachers say things which aren't necessarily logical, and that's sort of taken in the house as truth, are used to can be tricked by people who have a certain amount of charisma and say things, and they'll fall in line.
But in terms of accepting science, it seems like in Europe, as the gentleman said,
right.
there are people who are religious, but also believe in science, beginning,
But we
One of
don't.
them is in the Vatican. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why don't
But the Vatican itself actually believes in science.
Right.
But I think Europe does not have the evangelical group.
Or they're different.
Or they're different or something.
Are there other questions from the audience? Yes, there's a whole group of people back there. Yeah.
Hello. What I'd like to say is that the lady sitting right here, she's very sarcastic, which is the opposite of me. And I guess that's why she's sarcastic. I like to put a little levity, a little humor into the statement that I'm going to make, or question. I'd like to know where Dr. Wilson chose to put his red bra on his knee and wear a red tie. Is that a relationship, or was that by accident?
I think it was quite by accident.
Yes.
I didn't put it over my face, and the knee was the obvious place to store it.
But it's so nice to be color coordinated.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, the gentleman in the middle there. You are?
My name is Scott, and it's for Dr. Wilson. I'm a big fan. Was there a lot of pressure from Bell Laboratories for immediate practical application of your discoveries?
Good
No,
question. To repeat, was there a lot of pressure from Bell Labs when you worked there to make some kind of practical application of the Big Bang?
No, there was not. I think there were a couple of things going on. One was that our immediate boss had been at Bell Labs in the late 20s with Carl Jansky, who was the first radio astronomer in the world. They had discovered radiation from the center of our galaxy. And the Depression followed, and Bell Labs did not follow up on that very much. And I think there was a feeling that an opportunity had been missed. And so there was also a pride in having made the world's lowest noise receiving system and wanting to see it put to better use than just receiving Eisenhower's voice, which had been transmitted by JPL.
Yeah.
And they gave us originally, they said we could do half-time radio astronomy and we should do something the other half of the time for the Bell system. And yes, later. It was not until 1966, after our announcement and the confirming results, that our boss's boss said, well, The idea was you were going to do radio astronomy halftime. I haven't seen anything for the Bell system yet. And then he signed the purchase order he called us in about. But
Well,
anyway,
I bet they were glad when you won the Nobel Prize.
oh, yes, they were certainly very pleased.
Yeah.
In the meantime, I had done a number of practical experiments, like using radio astronomy techniques to measure what would happen with satellite communication at a new frequency. I think they got their money's worth.
Dr. Wilson is now at Harvard, in addition to being at Bell Labs. We have time for one more question, and then we need to wrap it up. Is there a question out there?
Hi, my name's Jeremy. At the back here.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask Robert a question. I was fascinated by the MIT, the device that measures, that can tell an emotion. And I wonder, I realized that the process of your discovery was rigorous, long, and logical. But was there a moment where you felt you'd reached this conclusion, and if that MIT device had been pointed at you, what would your emotion have been? Do you think it would have been? And then, Eric, how would you have made that manifestly comic?
I would say that in the cosmic microwave background radiation, things occurred so slowly, there really wasn't a particular aha moment. There was one kind of nice moment in 1965 when a year after our first record, Walter Sullivan of the New York Times called up and asked a bunch of questions. My father came for a visit from Texas, and the next morning, we had his grandchildren, so the next morning he got up, and while we were making breakfast, he walked down to the pharmacy, came back with the New York Times, and there on the front page of it was a story by Walter Sullivan about our discovery and the Princeton explanation. And at that point, I began to believe that cosmology may be the real explanation here. But it really was many years before cosmology developed into such a science that we get a lot of information out of it. I had a different discovery. We went out to look for carbon monoxide, a very simple molecule in the universe, and it bowled us over when we found it. We happened to look at the brightest source in the sky, and carbon monoxide was the strongest of the simple rotation states of molecules. And it has since been very useful in understanding star formation, but that was an immediate discovery. The instrument was making a measurement every 2 seconds, and as soon as it hit the source, I saw that something had happened. We moved off the source and it went away. And that was really a remarkable feeling of, aha, we found what we're looking for.
Bob, if this universe starts to end, do you have any thoughts about making a new one?
No.
You don't know how to do it, or you don't want to do it?
No idea.
No idea, not interested.
Of course, there may be millions or infinite number of other universes.
Better ones.
Who knows?
Who knows?
Who knows?
But we'll never know.
That is a very good closing line. Who knows? And on that, we should thank our guests, and I want to thank you, the audience. When Susan said to me, my God, we've accidentally planned this on Super Bowl night, I said, well, maybe it won't be that bad because we will get an audience that really wants to be here. And we did. Thank you for coming.